So I've been seeing an increasing number of tweets and other expressions of sentiment, basically saying some version of like, all right, that's enough. No more Mr. Nice Cop. It's time to crack down on this shit in terms of the riots. And let me say, like, I get it. Like, I understand for, like, really, I do. Irrespective of the underlying Black Lives Matter movement, which I fully support, there is this partially separate issue about the violence, a lot of which is being done by white people, by Antifa people, and maybe some white supremacists and Boogaloo boys and whoever the hell it is. There's these people doing violence, some of which is, maybe a lot of which is actually quite disconnected from the protest. And I get it, why people are incredibly frustrated and angry and exasperated and just want it to end, because it's hurting innocent people and innocent businesses at a time when they can't afford that, and it's causing all this damage and destruction and chaos, and people want it to end. And I completely understand that goal. Here's my question, though. Presumably we all agree that we don't want to have a bunch of Kent states in multiple cities. We don't want to have, widespread death and violence against protesters. And in fact, I think, we probably understand that at least initially, something like that would make the protests more potent. And in order to have state a violent crackdown, be quote unquote effective, you would need it to be very severe, because before people would feel their fear would be greater than their outrage. That's a very dark concept. It's not something that we contemplate generally in America as being a goal of public policy. And again, I don't mean to conflate the rioters and the protesters, because I know that they are different, and I feel very strongly actually about that, and I'm quite angry at the violent agitators that are both they're hijacking a peaceful, legitimate, extremely important protest movement in order to pursue a completely different agenda, and they're actually endangering Black lives. It's the furthest thing from Black Lives Matter, and so I'm really angry about that, and I'm not equating the two. But the truth is, if the government, the National Guard or military or whatever, were to start, shooting live bullets or even shooting a hell of a lot more rubber bullets or whatever this crackdown that people seem to want, whatever form it would take, like if it were to be severe enough to cow the rioters into submission, it would also outrage a lot of protesters who would be shocked to see their government behaving that way towards its citizens, no matter how, no matter what those sort of initial distinctions and divisions within the protest / riot / demonstration were. And so then you would end up, with even more protests. You would also bring out more, radical types. Like, is there any example in a liberal democratic state, like in a non-authoritarian country, of a protest movement, a mass protest movement, being quelled into submission prior to, having sort of reached a really, really high level of destruction first, being quelled into submission just purely based on ramped up police tactics and fear. So my point is, I don't understand, and I kind of suspect that a lot of people haven't thought it through. Like, what is the end game for like the, and I'm not talking about Trump, because Trump's a jackass and an idiot, and he doesn't have an end game. He doesn't have a strategy. He just has an id, and that's all he ever has. But like the people in my feed who are decent, reasonable people, who are saying, you know, well, it's time, we need to crack down on this. I'm not an expert in like crowd control or anything, but it seems like there are different ways to go about it, and there are different approaches, some of which are built mainly on coercion, and some of which are built mainly on like what you might think of as sort of like a version of diplomacy. This isn't foreign relations, but it's kind of like this, it's kind of a similar concept to like militarism versus diplomacy. It's like you can use brute force, or you can try to use a combination of you know, force, threat of force, persuasion, containment, mitigation, and that's, I think, what they're, the latter, I think, is what they're doing now, largely, right? Is okay, let's kind of like figure out where we can defend, where we can't, you know, how much can we contain this, and I'm not saying that it's working great, but some people seem to be like incensed that that's the strategy. Like, how dare you not prevent this thing from whatever, you know, this building that burned down or this looting that occurred? How could you just stand by and let it happen? And I mean, I think the answer is because in order to, if a situation gets to a certain point, you're not going to be able to stop it short of a level of force that is not something that most Americans are comfortable with against our own citizens, right? There's a lot of like euphemistic talk about this where people say like we need to get tough and strength. Trump treated strength earlier. And like ultimately, are you willing to resort to deadly force? And if so, how much? How many people are we going to kill with the force of the state to stop these riots? Like, I mean, I would like to say none. Like, now, things can go wrong, and that's part of the fear, is like this things spiral out of control. You know, someone misinterprets someone else's action, and pretty soon shots are flying, right? Like that can happen, and may very well happen. But like, if we're talking about using brute force to just shut everything down, or shut down the riot part, there's a reason why we don't just do that. It's like the first several steps in that escalation are like justifiable, perhaps on like a legalistic basis, because like, well, these people are not being peaceful. Like the rioter portion of them, right? They're not being peaceful. They're, you know, these Antifa people, these white supremacist people, these boogaloo, whatever these people are. They're destroying property, and they're threatening people and whatever. And so we can use coercive force to crack down on them. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. But the problem is that like, if you basically say like, well, the rules of engagement are we just push as much as we have to until they stop, that means that you might end up killing people, maybe sort of on purpose, because maybe that's what it would take to get them to stop. You know, and I would think that we wouldn't make that trade-off, that we would rather live in a country where sometimes violent elements do bad things and have to be prosecuted after the fact in the criminal justice system, and we accept that as a price of freedom, that sometimes crowds are going to get out of control, and we're not going to shoot at them like the Chinese did in Tiananmen Square, or like the Iranians did. Granted, I realize that like those regimes will shoot at peaceful protesters too, so it's not the same, and I get that. But my point is that like, even if it is non-peaceful, if it's enough of people being non-peaceful, and in order to stop them, we have to shoot them. Like, if the price of preventing it is many American lives and violence against American citizens by the American government or American state governments, then that price seems too high to me to prevent civil unrest from damaging more property, which is not to diminish the importance of not property rights are important. People are losing their homes and their livelihoods, and that's all very important. And it's very, I don't downplay it for a moment. And I don't like it when I see people on the left, you know, sort of saying like, well, that's just property. No, I mean, that's crap. Like, people whose businesses are being destroyed or damaged by all this, or their homes are, like, that's not cool. And it's totally reasonable for people to be very upset about that. But if the price of preventing that in certain instances, as opposed to prosecuting after the fact, if the price of that is widespread shooting, is widespread violence against the citizenry, then is that what people want? Like, is that what people think it should be the end game? I just want people to say it. I want to understand. Like, if you're gonna say that we're doing it wrong right now, we're not being forceful enough right now, how forceful should we be, and where should we draw the line? I just want to know what the end game that they foresee is, and how this escalation that they want will end this. Because it doesn't seem to me like it will. It seems to me like we need to keep using this messy mixture of persuasion and coercion and containment and mitigation, and, you know, like, and then maybe we need to, when it's all over, to find some way to help the people that have been hurt by it, help them rebuild, you know, whether with taxpayer money or something, because that's a real thing. I mean, that's a real problem. I don't know.